Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar, Leap second webinar in our August webinar series. Apologies that we have started a few moments later than bang on 11. I wanted to just provide a little bit of time for a few more people to be able to join us for our conversation today about building inclusion and innovation through volunteering. My name's Laura, and I am shortly going to switch over to a slide presentation to talk through our conversation this morning. But I thought that it is sometimes helpful to be able to picture the person that is speaking with you during a webinar, so I wanted to have the chance to say hello in person before I do that. Now, as I mentioned, today's topic is looking at building innovation through volunteering, and today I'm going to be talking particularly about our digital inclusion initiatives and some of the work that we've done at Leep to facilitate ways of building volunteer engagement into our programs and really centering volunteer engagement at the heart of what we're doing and what we're hoping to achieve. A few minor housekeeping notes before we do launch into today's conversation. You'll see on the right-hand side of your screen that there is an option to post questions. Please feel free if something does spring to mind that you'd like to ask throughout this morning's conversation. Please go ahead and post those questions in that bar there. I will do my best throughout our conversation to answer those, and I've left a little bit of time at the end so that I can come back and respond to any questions that have come up. We are recording this morning's webinar, so we will be sending around a recording of the webinar along with a short information sheet that captures some of the key points. So please don't feel the need to be madly scribbling away. I'd love for you to be able to sit back and take some food for thought away from this morning's conversation and reflect on the work that you're doing within your volunteering programs. I will be posting our contact details as part of the slideshow as well, so if you do have any follow-up thoughts or would like to converse with us a little bit more in detail about your specific volunteer program, then please feel free to get in touch with us at the end of this morning's conversation. So, as I mentioned, I wanted the chance to say hi in person. I am now going to take a moment to switch over to the slide presentation. So bear with me one moment as I do that. I'm going to switch the webcam off, so I'll say bye for now and speak to you in a moment. So just switching the screens over and launching that presentation. So hopefully you're all able to now see that, that screen there, that title slide, which is the topic for our conversation this morning, building innovation in volunteerism through digital inclusion. Now, as I mentioned, my name is Laura, so recapping that, and I've been with Leap for the last 3.5 years. I'm really privileged in my role to be able to work across all of our programs. As the Deputy CEO, I have the privilege of working with a number of our team. But having volunteered myself for a number of roles across numerous organisations, I have to say that I am very much a passionate volunteer advocate and really love the fact that I get to work quite closely with our Volunteer Solutions team. The other projects, for those that are not familiar with Leap or perhaps are engaging with us for the first time, then I'd like to say a special welcome to you. I'll do my best not to scare you away during this morning's conversation. But for those that aren't familiar with Leap and what we stand for, our mission, our purpose is to create inclusive communities, particularly for people experiencing disadvantage, so that we are able to imagine tomorrow together. And for us, inclusion is all about working with our community net, digital inclusion and volunteer solutions projects. So these three areas are the focus of our work. CommunityNet is a fabulous online platform that collates information and shares it across the community services sector, with a focus on Western Sydney and New South Wales, but collating information broadly from across Australia and around the world as well. Digital inclusion, I am going to talk a little bit, as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, about our work in the digital inclusion space today. So I will hold you all in suspense for a few moments and come back to that project shortly. And for our volunteer solutions team, which is really the platform that I'm speaking to you all from today, for us in the volunteer solutions team, we work to build capacity and build inclusion in volunteering programs so that we can support community organisations and volunteers to build inclusive communities. We really see, as the image on the slide suggests, that these three project areas overlap quite heavily. For us, digital inclusion can't really happen without volunteer involvement, and vice versa. And CommunityNet is such a great platform that, as I said, collates that information on a central platform for community services and the general public across Australia. My colleagues in both the CommunityNet and digital inclusion space are running their own webinars on every Tuesday during August. We're running a webinar, so I encourage you, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about those two projects and the work that we do, to sign up and join in on one of those upcoming webinars as well. So now that we've gotten to know each other a little bit better, or I've got to share with you a little bit of context about Leep and my work with our organisation, I want to move into looking at the big question that I'm concerned with today, which is, how do volunteer involving organisations adapt and innovate new ways of volunteer engagement, particularly around digital inclusion? Now, I'm certainly not going to proclaim that the way that we've looked to innovate volunteer involvement at Leep is the only way forward. I think that innovation, the great thing about innovation, is that it inspires and necessitates really new ways of thinking and working. What I hope to do today is to share some stories about what we have done at Leep, and to hopefully inspire some food for thought and some reflection on the way that you engage and work with your volunteers. I think this particular question, considering how we can adapt our practices in the volunteering sector, is quite a pertinent question to be asking, particularly at the moment. And it's been a question that I've been reflecting on and considering for the past year or so. I think what we've seen happen within the volunteering landscape is a change and a shift that has occurred. Those of us that are responsible for funding or resourcing volunteer programs, I'm sure, can attest to how the funding landscape has changed for community organisations. Organisations and volunteer groups are being encouraged to diversify funding streams and look at new ways of resourcing volunteering. But I think even if we really drill down into the concept of volunteering itself, we can see some subtle and perhaps some not so subtle changes in the way that volunteers are wanting to engage with programs. Leep did a little bit of research last year, and we actually ran a webinar last year, again in August, looking at some of the trends or the changes that have occurred in the volunteering landscape. Some of the statistics we may already be familiar with, the fact that data shows that volunteer rates have declined across Australia in recent years. The fact that we are increasingly becoming an aged population and an increasingly ageing population within Australia, which brings about new demographics and new individuals that are looking to volunteer that have different needs. As a society and a population, we're also increasingly engaging more and more online and looking to find ways to volunteer or contribute that meet our limited availability or our want to give back while we're juggling family and work commitments as well. The research that we did last year also showed that we are an increasingly time-poor society, something that I can certainly attest to. We're actually working longer and working harder than we have ever before. So the actual amount of time that we have to contribute as a volunteer and to give back is becoming less and less. Yet people are still seeking ways to contribute and connect with their community. The rise of e-volunteering, short-term volunteering, micro-volunteering, they're all buzzwords that are being talked about more and more frequently within volunteering circles. We've also seen a rise in a number of online volunteering platforms, and I think that's further evidence of individuals wanting to connect in a way that gives them an opportunity to use their unique skills, do so at a time that is available to them and accessible to them, but still reap the rewards that volunteering brings and have that sense of connection to community and fulfillment as a result of giving of yourself. So you may already be tapping into some of these mechanisms. You may have brought in some short-term volunteers or looked to adapt roles that make them more accessible, or perhaps create roles that are able to be completed online. And if so, that's really fabulous. I think that we need to be looking at those online platforms that are available and looking at the rise of short-term volunteering as a great opportunity to adapt the way that we involve volunteers and embrace those platforms that are available to us. And I think really when, again, we start drilling down into these stats, we can see that we have a slightly new breed of volunteers that are emerging. Now, I'm generalising a little bit here, and I'm not suggesting that the more traditional model of who a volunteer might be is going to completely erode and fade away. I don't think that's the case. But volunteers that, again, are looking to make use of their unique skill set, contribute to a cause they believe in, and do so at a time that suits their availability and their needs, are, I think, more and more going to become the norm of individuals that are volunteering within our communities. So I think our challenge as volunteer managers or as volunteer involving organisations is to find ways to build flexibility and innovation into our programs that facilitates engagement for this newer breed of volunteers. I wanted to share a short story with you all here, which reflects some of the photos on the screen there, about where we've sought to create a flexible volunteering opportunity and do so in quite a fun and quirky way. For National Volunteer Week this year, we sought to promote volunteering and we wanted to get out and about in Parramatta and really celebrate the work that volunteers contribute to build really inclusive and engaged communities. So to do that, we thought we'd take a roller coaster ride through Parramatta and we recruited 20 volunteers to come along, help us build some slightly crazy looking props and join us for a walk through Parramatta, a bit of a flash mob to celebrate the work of volunteers, celebrate National Volunteer Week, and also encourage passers-by to look at volunteering in a bit of a different light. Now, something that started out as a bit of a quirky idea as a way of promoting volunteering actually became a really amazing way to engage some younger volunteers and engage volunteers that had never considered volunteering before. Of that group of 20, about half of them had never volunteered before. This was their first experience. And about half of that group then came to us and put up their hand to complete some ongoing volunteer work with us further down the track. We also saw some great social connections built through this activity as well, and we made sure that we made space at the end of the event to have a meal together and share some laughs and some stories, which I think really helped to solidify some of those social connections and create a really meaningful role and moment for those volunteers. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all necessarily run out and do a flash mob to celebrate volunteering, although what an amazing celebration of volunteering and what an amazing promotion would that be if we had volunteering communities all across Sydney, all across Australia, banding together to do some joint activity. But I think what we tried to do in this example and what we successfully did was find a creative way to engage volunteers that really balanced out the goals of what we were trying to achieve as an organisation as well. Now, if our challenge is to be more creative and look to innovate new ways of volunteer engagement, the challenge for that, I think, can sometimes be where to start. So I'd like to invite and encourage you all to consider this as a little bit of a question. What is your biggest challenge related to volunteer engagement? Now, I'm going to invite you all just to ponder that for a few moments while I explore another example of where we've looked to create innovation. Have a little bit of a think about what areas you find challenging when recruiting or engaging volunteers, and feel free to post your thoughts in that questions poll, and we'll come back to that in a few moments and see what you guys thought, see what some of those challenges are that are arising as part of your volunteer engagement strategy. So I mentioned at the start that digital inclusion was a really big platform for us here at Leep, and an area that we are moving more and more into working with. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the term, or who are sitting there thinking, well, what does digital inclusion mean? What's it all about? For us at Leap, it's about recognising that there is a gap, recognising that 1 in 5 Australians currently are not online and are not participating in the digital society. And it's about finding ways to assist people to make that leap, to step into that digital world. Now, if we think about our communities, our work, the social circles that we move in, our world is increasingly moving to digital means. The fact that I'm sitting here in a room in Penrith talking to a group of people scattered across New South Wales, I think is evidence of that. But even when we start to think about some of our daily tasks, like purchasing groceries, paying bills, accessing healthcare or government services, so many of these platforms now rely or require people to be confident using a device and using the internet to be able to complete them. And I think that we're only going to see more and more of those services move to solely online means as we move forward. So our vision at Leap is really to support people, as I said, to make that leap and to step into those digital communities. Well, you can see with some of the statistics that are on the screen there as well that people who identify with a disability or who report or who are isolated in their home experience greater disadvantage when engaging online. So for us, it's really important to be working with communities that may be experiencing disadvantage, assisting them to build confidence and skills to be online. One of the ways that we sought to do this and assist people to get online is through our Leap In Lab. Now, our Leap In Lab involves volunteers coming to our premises here in Penrith and providing one-on-one mentoring to assist people to build confidence and skills to engage online. Individuals can come to us with any number of questions. It could be a question about setting up email or transferring photos from a smartphone onto a computer. We've had people come to us with very little digital skills and are really looking to start from scratch and understand what the internet is and how they can be using it and making the most of it. So our fabulous team of volunteer mentors assist those individuals, sit down with them one-on-one and work through the challenges and problems that they might be facing. You can see again from some of the statistics that are on the screen there that even though the program's only been running for a couple of months, it's really only been fully active since the start of this year. We're pretty proud and we're pretty excited about some of the things that we've been able to achieve. With over 160 hours of volunteer mentoring provided, we've seen a really fabulously dedicated team of volunteers contributing to this program. But we've also seen customers or attendees come back week after week and really gain that confidence to be engaging online. If I can flick back briefly to this image here, this is on the left there, Jason, one of our volunteer mentors, and on the right is Robin, one of the participants of the Leep Lab. Robin, when she started with us, had very little understanding about computers and the internet, and was really looking to engage in the online world for the first time. She hadn't purchased a tablet or hadn't purchased a device before coming to see us. And Jason recalled that after that first meeting, the sort of questions and the sort of things that he was working through with Robin were about understanding what the internet is, understanding what email is, and talking through some of her questions with her. If we skip forward about 6 weeks down the track now, Robin's still coming to our lab. She's now purchased a tablet and she's using that at home with the support of the mentors that are working with her. And week after week, Robin comes in wanting to expand her knowledge and test her skills and find new ways to be using that device. So that's one small success story that I think really highlights how important it is to take the time out to work with individuals one-on-one, and how much of a difference it can make for someone learning how to use a device and engage online as well. Now, as I mentioned, we are going to be running some other webinars in August, so I won't talk too much more about the Leep Lab from a participant perspective today. I do encourage you to watch our upcoming webinar about setting up a Leep Lab, because we want to support organisations to do the work to set up their own digital inclusion services as well. So if you've got clients that you think would benefit from accessing a digital inclusion program, or you think it's something that you'd like to build into your volunteer program, build into the work that you do, then make sure you check out some of our upcoming webinars, which will go through that in a little bit more detail. For the purposes of our big question today about how do we build innovation into volunteering, I want to focus in on the volunteers that have really made this program the success that it is. When thinking about how we've sought to model volunteer engagement, particularly for the Leep Lab, a couple of strategies or elements came to mind that have really formed strong volunteer engagement for this cohort. I think first and foremostly what we've done is look to really build volunteer engagement as a key element as part of this program. Of course, we are wanting to produce great community outcomes and support people to, again, build that confidence and skills to engage online. But we recognise that we can't do that without volunteers that are really engaged and really supportive of the work that we're doing. So thinking about that volunteer engagement, there are 4 elements, as I mentioned, that have really helped to solidify that as part of the Leep Lab. So the first one is social inclusion. So that for us is about creating space for volunteers to interact not only with the clients that are coming in and working with them, but also with the other volunteers that are forming part of that group. As part of our National Volunteer Week celebration, we took our volunteers bowling, which was a great icebreaker for a few of the newer volunteers, and also proved to be a great way for volunteers to interact not only with each other, but also with our broader staff team as well. Broadening networks and connecting with new people has been a really key motivation for a lot of our volunteers who are coming through our door and engaging with this program. One volunteer in particular, Chris, prior to volunteering with us, was quite isolated at home and didn't have the opportunity to get out and meet new people very often. As a volunteer with the Leep Lab, Chris now has his own little fan club as part of the work that he does. He has clients that come in and request his support as a digital mentor, which he's pretty thrilled about. And he's shared with us how impactful it's been for him to be able to broaden his networks and connect with new people, how that has really strengthened his confidence and improved his well-being. So I think social inclusion across any volunteering program is such a key element to find ways to facilitate that engagement and that connection across a volunteer cohort. And it's something that I think has been really important as part of our volunteer team for the Leep Lab. Skills development has been another area that we've really looked to create space for volunteers to test and broaden their skill sets. One of our volunteers working with the Leep Lab is currently completing her Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment. So we've actually provided some space for her to be able to complete part of her assessments through that program. We've also built in some train the trainer elements as part of the administration tasks that some of our volunteers complete. So alongside the lab, we actually have a number of, again, really dedicated volunteers coming in to provide some admin support to our volunteer team. And the volunteers that are providing that admin support, for the most part, are looking at volunteering as a pathway to employment. They're hoping to gain some local experience and further develop their skills so that they can hopefully move into a paid position further down the track. So we've encouraged them to share their skills with one another, to train each other in the areas that they've developed some expertise in, so that they've got the experience of not only building those skills, but also talking about them and translating them and sharing them with other individuals, which I think can be really beneficial for volunteers who are wanting to talk about their experience as a pathway to employment as well. The third pillar there is about digital literacy, and that's clearly a key element of the Leep Lab. It's about facilitating digital literacy and digital inclusion for participants. But it's also been really important for us to recognise that at a volunteer level as well. We don't expect our digital mentors to come in and have all of the answers or all of the knowledge about different devices and different ways to be using technology. We just want them to come in with a really positive attitude and find ways to problem solve and work through challenges that participants are having. So creating space for the volunteers themselves to improve and build on their digital literacy has been really important. And we actually had 2 of our volunteers stay back last week and work through some of their own digital inclusion questions and support each other to build their digital literacy. And that was really great for us to see that happen organically and be sort of self-motivated by the volunteers themselves too. And the fourth pillar there is encouraging leadership. So providing opportunities for volunteers to step up and take on new challenges as part of their role. I think that sometimes we look at placing volunteers in a specific role, we provide a job description, and we sometimes lock those volunteers into the tasks that they're doing. But looking at finding ways for volunteers that are really excelling or showing a particular interest or passion in an area to further explore that, firstly is a great way of really valuing and recognising the motivations that volunteer might have. And it's also a great way of adding capacity into the volunteer programs that we're running. All of our volunteers as part of the Leep Lab are invited to planning days. And they've actually designed and developed a lot of the strategy and the ways that we are engaging with participants of that program themselves. We've provided space for them to develop resources, to run classes to participants. And I think that's really assisted to, again, encourage those volunteers to build skills, build confidence, and find ways to continue to adapt the work that they're doing. We've also created an opportunity for one of our volunteers to step into a project assistant role, and that particular volunteer again is looking at potentially moving back into the workforce a little further down the track. So having the opportunity for her to move into a role where she is coordinating other people, where she's broadening her skills, has been a really valuable way of assisting her to step up into a new space and into a new role. Now, I'm certain that there's lots of other strategies that we could talk about here, but these four in particular are things that we found really essential and important part of building really strong volunteer engagement throughout the Leep in Lab. Now, a key point to note here as well is that as an organisation, we're still working within a model that meets community needs. We haven't completely thrown the textbook out the window and built something entirely from scratch. Well, we have to a certain extent. But what we're doing is we're still working within national standards. We're still working within frameworks for volunteer management best practice that supports volunteers and values the work that they do. But we're continuously looking at ways that we can adapt that progress and that process. So I think that innovation is not necessarily about completely starting from scratch, but what we've tried to do with our volunteer team is to look at how volunteers can bring their own expertise into the program, and actually putting their interests, their skills, their motivations first, and using that as a platform to build the program around. Now, I do want to come back and hear a little bit about what you all thought in terms of your challenge for volunteer recruitment. I do have to pause the slideshow to do that though, and to have a look at the questions. So bear with me one moment, and I'm just going to come in here and pause that screen sharing and have a look at some of your responses. Well, it looks like everyone is thinking long and hard about that question, which is great. We actually completed some research a little bit earlier in the year looking at our volunteer organisations that we work with and the volunteers that are coming to us to look at finding volunteer roles. And so as part of that, we were looking to find out what volunteer organisations are putting out there, what sort of roles are they advertising, and what sort of roles are volunteers themselves looking to engage with. So I will come back in here and pick up that screen share, because I do want to share some of those results with you about that market research and about, again, that gap that we're finding between what volunteer organisations are looking for and what volunteers are seeking to engage with. Now, I believe that my graphic here has gone a little bit off kilter, so apologies. It will be correct in the information sheet that we sent around as part of the resource pack from today. But just to talk through some of those pieces on the screen there, when we asked volunteers about the type of roles that they were looking to engage with, we were finding that 31% of the volunteers we were talking to, so almost a third, were looking at volunteering as a pathway towards employment. So they were individuals that had either recently arrived in Australia and were looking to gain local knowledge, or they were looking to move back into the workforce perhaps after some extended time off. They saw volunteering as a great way, as a great stepping stone to build that experience and look at potentially moving towards paid employment further down the track. 72% of the volunteers that we spoke with were identified as experiencing multiple forms of disadvantage. So what we mean there is that they perhaps identified as being unemployed, but they may have also identified as a person with disability or as a person from a non-English speaking background. So what that meant was that the barriers towards their volunteer engagement were perhaps a little bit higher than individuals who didn't identify as experiencing any form of social or economic disadvantage. So I think what those first two statistics really highlight is that we're increasingly finding quite a diverse volunteer pool that are wanting to engage with our programs. And I think that's really important to keep in mind and to think about when we're looking to innovate or create new ways for volunteer engagement. If we move towards those last couple of points on the screen there, 20% of volunteers that we were speaking with were looking to engage with event volunteering. So there were individuals that were perhaps juggling work and family life and were really keen to contribute to a volunteer program, but didn't have a large amount of time to be able to commit. So event volunteering provides a really great platform for people to jump in, tap into an event, contribute, but to then be able to step out of that opportunity when their availability doesn't suit. We also had 14% of volunteers looking for administration or office-related roles, which I think links into individuals looking at volunteering as a pathway towards employment. And only 11% of the volunteers that we spoke with sought aged care-related roles. And I think that's perhaps a reflection of that more traditional model of volunteering, or perhaps some of those more traditional volunteering roles being less engaging for volunteers that are perhaps looking to use a specific set of skills. When we flipped the question around and spoke with some of the organisations that we work with, the answers that we received show that there's a little bit of a disconnect, a little bit of a mismatch between the two. Again, I apologise for the screen not quite lining up. This did all work brilliantly for me a little earlier this morning, but we will have the correct version sent out in the resource pack. So what the statistics are showing or trying to show on the screen here is that 20% of organisations offered opportunities for volunteering to occur on weekends. That I think is great and quite significant. You know, a fifth of our organisations are looking to be flexible with the way that they involve volunteers and create opportunities for volunteers to be involved outside of the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. When we start looking at the types of roles that organisations were offering, only 8% of roles being advertised were for event volunteering, contrasted with the 20% of volunteers who are looking to engage with event roles. Again, 8% of roles being advertised were for administration duties, and 18% of roles being advertised related to aged care. So I think what that market research really highlighted for us was that the opportunities available for volunteers to engage with are not quite meeting the needs or the demands of those volunteers that are wanting to connect with local organisations. I think that actually provides a really exciting opportunity, because what it shows is that we've got volunteers that are out there that are keen to connect and keen to give of their time and their skills. They're just looking at new ways to do it. So again, if I look at sort of wrapping up some of our conversations this morning and some of the ways that we've sought to create new opportunities, we've really looked to try and understand what volunteers are wanting to get out of their experience. We've looked to build in that social inclusion, skills development, digital literacy and leadership as part of our volunteer involving programs. And we've sought feedback from volunteers along the way as well, and looked at ways that we can continuously adapt that program. And I think the results are evident that we're on the right track. Our volunteers, for the most part, have stuck with us throughout most of those 6 months. We have had new volunteers come on board and join that program along the way too. But that engagement, that retention, for me is really indication that what we're doing is working. Now, as I said, I don't want to profess that this is the silver bullet that will magically ensure that we have fantastic volunteer retention across all of our programs. But if I can leave you with a few takeaways today, it would be to reflect on your volunteer program and think about how you can put your volunteer engagement firmly at the centre of that program. Are there opportunities for you to perhaps collect some feedback from your volunteers and talk about ways that they can bring their unique skill sets or their ideas into their role and look at adapt that role that meets their needs as volunteers but still balances out what you're trying to achieve as an organisation? Is digital inclusion perhaps an avenue for you to look at incorporating as part of your volunteer program? Do you have volunteers themselves who could benefit from some digital mentoring, from learning a little bit more about how to use their devices? Do you have a client base that would benefit from, again, wanting to engage more confidently with the online community? These are a few key questions that I'd encourage you to take away and consider from today, and source that feedback from your volunteers to really hear about what's important for them and how they want to be engaged with. Now, I will take a moment here. We are coming towards the end of our conversation for this morning. I realise it has been quite a one-way conversation and you've heard a lot from me. So if anyone does have any questions or comments, please feel free to post that in the comments section there. I am going to take a moment to pause the screen viewing so that I can have a look at some of those questions that might be coming through. So there's a comment that's come through about recruiting volunteers for more long-term roles, particularly when considering social support services, and that one of the challenges associated with that is accepting volunteers who are perhaps looking for short-term roles. That is a conversation that I've had with a number of volunteer coordinators, and I think that is definitely a tricky role to look at, perhaps creating flexibility around, because obviously as part of that role you're looking to support clients and some sort of and build connection between volunteers and clients as well. So certainly, as I said, some of the ways that we've looked to incorporate more short-term volunteering is not necessarily going to be applicable for every volunteer program, but if you do want to have a chat to us a little bit more, or tease out some ways that you might be able to bring in some sort of buddy system, or look at, again, really bringing in the thoughts and ideas of what volunteers are wanting to achieve out of their role, we are always here as a point to be able to talk to as well. And I should mention that as our Volunteer Solutions team provides training and support and capacity building for volunteer involving organisations across Western Sydney. So if there are any specific questions or comments about your particular volunteering program, then again, I'd encourage you to get in touch with us and have a chat to us. We'd be more than happy to talk through any of those more specific challenges that you might be facing as well. Well, we have taken up not quite the hour this morning that was allocated, but I do want to thank you all for taking time out to tune in this morning. Again, I would encourage you to get in touch if you do have any further questions, and I will pop up our contact details on the screen there. Please feel free to reach out. We will send out the recording from this morning and that information pack with some of the key points. And again, please feel free to tune into our other webinars that are coming up throughout August. They're going to be really exciting, and particularly looking at the idea of setting up digital inclusion programs within your services. There's going to be some great tips and tricks talked about within that webinar as well. So again, thank you all for tuning in this morning. I hope that I'm going to flick back to webcam so I can say goodbye in person. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your morning, and I wish you all the best in creating innovative and creative volunteering roles for your volunteers and communities alike. So thank you very much, and hope to speak to you soon. Bye.